Now, 2020 has been a difficult and stressful year. COVID-19 has changed everything, how we socialise, how we work. It's impacted our health and, of course, has also tragically taken loved ones from us. And now, added to that, the holidays are here. For people struggling with mental illness or loneliness, it can be a particularly difficult time. Award-winning journalist and author Marion Sher has written a book dealing with depression and other mental illnesses. It's called Surfacing: People Coping with Mental Illness. It relates a number of personal stories, and it ends each chapter with a toolbox of useful tips to identify problems and also just get help. And Marion joins me now. Marion, thank you so much for your time. And as I was going through the book, I would imagine that the idea for this book came before all the impact of COVID-19, but it struck me that it was quite an opportune time for us to really engage with mental health issues, because it has been an extraordinarily difficult year on a mental health level, hasn't it?
Absolutely, Sally. Yes, the idea did come. In fact, it started 26 years ago, was when I first started writing about mental health. And in 2005, I was lucky enough to be amongst a group of South African journalists that got a fellowship with the Carter Center in America. President Carter's wife, Mrs. Carter, she promotes media fellowships on mental health journalism for the very reason of trying to break the stigma of mental health. And when I did you had to do various articles, I did that, but I always thought I'd do a book. And I started researching the book in September last year. And then, as you say, along came COVID. And I've worked always closely with SADAG. You're very familiar with South African Depression and Anxiety Group. And their figures alone, I mean, from receiving, I'm not sure of the exact figures now, but it's certainly tripled in a day to
Wow.
well over 1,000 calls a day. So, yes, this is a very important time for this book.
Yeah, and you know, obviously, it's a stressful time. Everyone's feeling anxiety. We already live in a country with high crime levels, so it's anyway quite stressful to live in South Africa. At what point, and I'm wondering, you know, did you mull this over? At what point does anxiety or depression become more than a typical and actually quite a normal response to a difficult period in one's life, and tip over into something that really requires you get help, either for yourself or for someone else?
Well, look, I want to make it very clear to everyone, I'm not a mental health professional. I am just a journalist and a ghostwriter. I usually write other people's stories, and I think that was it, was listening to other people's stories. And that is such a pertinent question, because one of the things that people kept telling me is very often their friends and family don't believe them, and they think it's, oh, you're having a bad day. And yes, we all have bad days. And, you know, speaking to a psychiatrist yesterday, actually, somebody I know said to me, you know, he doesn't think there's a single person in South Africa or anywhere in the world who this last year hasn't been affected, I mean, in some way by COVID, in other words, feeling down. So your question is, when does it tip over into what we call clinical depression? Well, there are signs of clinical depression, like if you can't get out of bed in the morning, if you lose your appetite, you're not interested in being with people. I can go on and on. As I say, I'm not a medical professional, but it is important for families and friends as well to be aware. And I think what's been interesting since the book has had its pre-publication through SADAG, that some of the people that have read the book have said to me, gosh, you know, this is the first time I really understood what mental illness is about. You know, I think they also, and people I interviewed, the people in the book, several of them, many of them said, friends and family didn't believe me. They sort of say, oh, you know, come on, get over yourself, get on with it.
And I think that comes through so strongly in Diane Naidu's story, and she's a mother whose daughter committed suicide when she was 15 years old. It's such an incredibly poignant story, and it's just something that as a parent you never want to even have to contemplate, but we have to engage with these issues. But ultimately she's a survivor, and just remarkable human survival despite incredibly difficult situations. And of course, loss is such a difficult thing to grapple with. But speaking to people like Diane, what did you learn about the human spirit?
Well, Diane is absolutely a remarkable person. She lost her 15-year-old, beautiful 15-year-old daughter, Tennille, to suicide. Her daughter took her own life. And that was completely unexpected. I mean, it really came out of the blue. They were a very close family. So getting over that was difficult. And then very shortly after, she lost her husband. And she was a relatively young woman at that point in time. And, you know, you do think, how do people get over this? Well, that's where SADAG did step in for her as well. And she did get, luckily, she got professional help. And she was very aware that she needed it. But, you know, that doesn't always happen. A lot of the stories in the book, it took them a long time. I mean, Daryl Brown, who's another wonderful story in the book, and Daryl, at a very young age, in his 20, I think he was 25, in fact, depression built up in his life, a lot of problems. And one day he went to London thinking he would start a new life and life would be better for him there. And as we've got a short time, I'll just tell you very briefly, he ended up jumping in front of a tube train. He didn't lose his life, he lost his legs. And in the book, you read his story, and it was only then, when he went to hospital, at that point in his life, that for the first time he got professional mental health help.
So, I mean,
and today, even without legs, he's the most amazing guy.
I mean, Marion, I think that the important message is that the way your book is structured, it's personal stories which draw you in, but also really important things that might make oneself realise, hang on, I've got a problem, or make you realise that a friend or family member. And such an important message at a time like this, where suicide does happen around the festive season because it can highlight loneliness. Marion, what are your top tips for someone who's perhaps worried about their own mental health or someone else's? At what point do they intervene? Do they have a conversation directly? What do they do?
Well, I think the important thing is, and that was why I wrote the book, Sally, it's all about the stigma. People keep saying to me, why did you write this book and why did you write it now? Well, it wasn't because of COVID, because it wasn't a thing then. Why I wrote it was to get people talking. People must not be afraid to talk about mental health. And within many communities in South Africa, black, white, coloured, Indian, the same thing. You know, it's seen as a shame. If someone's got heart disease or diabetes, they're not ashamed to talk about it. But God forbid they say, I've got depression, or I'm even worse, on antidepressants. And in 26 years, and I've done, I mean, this is just, I think, 11 stories in the book. I've done hundreds of stories. And over again, I hear the same thing, that, you know, I was frightened to tell people, and frightened to tell my boss. Gosh, nobody at work must know that I've got depression. But if they have a physical sickness. So my message is talk to people, and certainly to get hold of SADAG. SADAG, people can get hold of and I must really thank CIPLA, because they came behind us massively with sponsoring of this book and helping us get this book out. And CIPLA sponsored the mental health helpline of SADAG, South African Depression and Anxiety Group. Sally, can I just give the number?
Please do, Marion.
0800 456 789, or SADAG can be found on www.sadag.org. And if anyone listening tonight feels they might have a problem, please go on to SADAG, go onto the website, read about it, and speak to one of their highly, highly trained counsellors, and they will help you. There is help. And I think my message above all is speak about it. You must speak about it. You must have open conversations, and people must be educated about it.
There is no shame.
What I want.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Marion. I really do appreciate you giving us some time. That is Marion Sher. She's author of Surfacing, People Coping with Mental Illness. And I'm going to give you those numbers again. The SADAG helpline is 0800 456 789.